When the Third Reich fell, the world came for the men who built it. But behind each of them stood a wife, women who had lived like royalty on the spoils of mass murder. Their husbands got the trials and the headlines. The women got something slower and, in its own way, worse. By the last week of April 1945, Berlin was collapsing in real time. The Red Army had driven into the heart of the capital. Artillery was falling on the government district every few minutes, and the water and power had nearly failed. Beneath the garden of the Reich Chancellery, in the deep concrete warren known as the Führerbunker, Adolf Hitler and his inner circle waited for an end everyone could feel coming. On April 29th, Hitler married Eva Braun in a brief civil ceremony witnessed by only a few. The following afternoon, April 30th, the two of them retreated into his study. Braun took cyanide. Hitler shot himself. Their bodies were carried up into the garden and burned with gasoline as Soviet shells landed nearby. But the most haunting deaths in that bunker belonged to a family. Magda Goebbels, wife of propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, had brought all 6 of her children underground: Helga, Hildegard, Helmut, Holdine, Hedwig, and Heidrun, ranging from roughly 12 years old down to 4. She kept them washed and neatly dressed in that airless place, a performance of normalcy, surrounded by death. On the evening of May 1st, a doctor helped sedate the children with morphine. Once they were unconscious, cyanide capsules were administered, and all 6 died in their beds. Shortly after, Magda and Joseph Goebbels climbed to the garden, where they too took their lives. Their bodies were burned near the same scorched ground where Hitler had been cremated the night before. A wave of self-destruction. What happened in the bunker was not isolated. As the regime fell, a wave of suicide spread across Germany, especially among those bound to the Nazi state. In the small town of Demmin, in the path of the advancing Soviet army, hundreds of residents, many of them women and children, killed themselves over just a few days at the start of May 1945, some drowning in the rivers that ran through the town. Historians estimate the dead there in the high hundreds, one of the largest mass suicides in German history. The motives tangled together: terror of what Soviet occupation might bring, the collapse of everything they had believed in, and for those tied to the party elite, a sense that surrender itself was a kind of disgrace. For many women married into the Nazi leadership, that logic ran deeper still. To be the wife of a senior official was to be marked by association. And some chose death rather than face a reckoning they knew was coming. But most of them did not die in 1945. Most of them lived. And living turned out to be its own kind of sentence. Emmy Göring, From Mansions to a Cell. Emmy Göring had lived closer to royalty than almost any woman in the Reich. As the wife of Hermann Göring, Hitler's designated successor for much of the war, she moved through grand ceremonies, wore extravagant clothes, and lived among art collections, a great deal of it looted from Jewish families across occupied Europe. In the spring of 1945, that world ended. American forces took the family into custody, and Hermann Göring surrendered to the Allies, soon to stand as the highest-ranking defendant at the Nuremberg trials. Emmy was separated from her young daughter, Edda, and held in detention. The possessions were seized. The deference evaporated. In October 1946, Göring was sentenced to death, and then, the night before his scheduled hanging, he swallowed a smuggled cyanide capsule in his cell, cheating the executioner by hours. Emmy was eventually released and returned to Munich with little money and few remaining friends. She faced a court that classified her as a Nazi offender and barred her from the stage career she had once had. She lived quietly in a modest apartment for the rest of her years, publishing a memoir that defended her husband, and died in Munich in 1973. Margarete Himmler, the wife who knew nothing. Margarete Himmler offered the world a different posture entirely. She insisted she had seen nothing. Her husband, Heinrich Himmler, the SS chief who oversaw the concentration camp system and the machinery of the Holocaust, was captured by British forces in May 1945 and killed himself with a hidden cyanide capsule before he could be interrogated. Margarete was detained and questioned, and even as the evidence of the SS's crimes was laid out in courtrooms and reports, she maintained that her husband had been a decent man and that she had known nothing of the camps or the killings. To investigators who understood how close she had lived to the center of SS power and how thoroughly her comfortable life had been financed by it, that claim was difficult to credit. She was released, and she spent the rest of her life out of public view, never recanting, never explaining. She died in 1967, having admitted to nothing. Lina Heydrich, defending the architect. Lina Heydrich built the rest of her life around defending a man the world remembered as one of the Holocaust's chief organizers. Her husband, Reinhard Heydrich, a principal architect of the final solution, and the chair of the 1942 Wannsee Conference, where the bureaucracy of genocide was coordinated, had been assassinated by Czechoslovak agents in Prague in 1942. For a time, she had lived well on a state pension and powerful connections. When the war ended and she feared retribution, she eventually settled on the North Sea island of Fehmarn, where she ran a guest house to support herself. Locals knew exactly who she was. Her children were taunted at school, but Lina never expressed remorse. Across the following decades, she gave interviews and later published a memoir, recasting her husband as a man who had merely followed orders. A portrait that collapses against the documented record of what he planned and set in motion. She died in 1985, still defending him. Gerda Bormann, the death that outran justice. Gerda Bormann never reached a courtroom at all. As the wife of Martin Bormann, Hitler's powerful private secretary and one of the most feared men in the inner circle, she spent the war's final stretch in the orbit of the Berghof, the mountain retreat in the Bavarian Alps. Her husband vanished during the fall of Berlin. His fate stayed a mystery for decades until remains identified in the late 20th century confirmed he had died in 1945. Gerda was already gravely ill with cancer, and as the Allies advanced, she fled south with her children. She died in Italy in 1946, worn down by the disease. She never testified, never stood trial, never had to account for the years she had spent at the heart of the regime. Her many children were left scattered and parentless, carried off into a post-war world that had no place for the name they had been born into. By the early 1950s, almost all of these women had disappeared into obscurity. The mansions, the servants, the looted luxury, all of it was gone, replaced by small apartments, rural villages, and assumed names. Former friends stopped writing. Neighbors kept their distance. Their children frequently changed their surnames and moved away, trying to sever themselves from a history built on the ruin of an entire continent. No monuments marked their lives. No honors were recorded. Most died quietly, far from the world of power they had once moved through so easily. And that is the uncomfortable truth that lingers. These were not the women who designed the camps or signed the deportation orders, but they had lived on the proceeds of those crimes, smiled through the ceremonies, and in many cases defended the men responsible to their final breath. Some carried that inheritance with shame. Some buried it in denial. And a few held on to their loyalty until the very end. Of everything the wreckage of the Reich left behind, that last fact may be the most unsettling of all.